Listen, y'all know me, but some of y'all may not. Some of y'all may be new to this. I don't really mess around or play around or go camping, hiking, all of that type of stuff. I'm just not an outdoor in the woods type of person. Like, I go outdoors, don't get me wrong, but in the woods, it's not for me. So I already look at it a certain type of way. But I'm about to start looking at some of these national parks the same way. These mysteries that I be coming across, bro, it just, I don't know, man. The hairs on your arms and in the back of your neck do more than just stand up hearing some of these stories. And we're going to check out some mysteries today.
After a year like 2020, the idea of taking a nice hike and getting away from it all has definitely been an enticing prospect. But after looking into today's topic, I sort of have mixed feelings. And as I'm sure many of you know, countless hikers go missing in a wide variety of bizarre and mysterious circumstances. Not to deter you from taking that hike, as we all know Mother Nature can be unforgiving. But that being said, today's topic should put into perspective just how little we know about the disturbing events that truly unfold when people find themselves away from civilization. The world is both so small that crazy coincidences can occur, but also too large that we often don't find what we're looking for. And that being said, this is the true story of the SOS incident. On July 24th, 1989, two men had gone missing from Daisetsuan National Park in Japan. And shortly after, the search had begun, spanning the area surrounding Mount Asaidake, and a helicopter had begun searching throughout the day. As the day had come to a close, out of the corner of their eye, the rescue crew had noticed something down below. If it wasn't apparent from the footage already, there was an SOS signal that was visible from the sky, measuring in at 18 meters in length and 5 meters tall, made out of various precisely cut birch trees. This sign was found about 4 kilometers south of the summit of Mount Asaidake, where there was no trail and people rarely ever veered towards that location. Seeing this as a clear call for help, the local police landed and patrolled the area in order to investigate, and as it would turn out, just a kilometer or so north, the hikers ended up walking out of the woods and were rescued. Shortly after, almost everything was back to normal, and when the hikers were debriefed on the situation, they had been told had it not been for that SOS sign, rescuing them would have been a hell of a lot more difficult. When the hikers were told this, they were puzzled because they had never created any SOS sign. In fact, they had no idea what the police were even talking about, making their initial rescue an insane coincidence that would lead investigators down an entirely separate mystery. Because if they never made that sign, who did?
Right. Like, y'all need to double back. It's some more people in distress. Like, that would have freaked me out. The people who got rescued and the people who rescued them. Both parties should have been freaked out by that. Like, why are so many people getting stranded in this location?
The next day, police dispatched a second search. The new efforts yielded some very interesting findings. For one, the most notable finding was an entirely separate human pile of bones, and this human skeleton was found 10 to 30 meters around the area of where the SOS sign was. To note some of the condition of the bones there, some of them had gnaw marks on them, likely due to wild animals in the area, and some of the bones were broken as well, indicating that whoever this was may have undergone some major injury. However, this wasn't the only thing found in the second search. And about 165 feet north of the sign, buried in a hole just large enough to fit a single human, under some tree roots, a backpack was found containing 3 cassette tapes, a Sony tape recorder, as well as some basic toiletries and other supplies. After some time, the bones were collected and then later sent to the Ashikawa Medical University, who later declared that the bones belonged to a woman with a blood type of O. This left the investigation even more puzzled, as they soon recognized that none of the items found in that hole under the tree roots had seemed to correspond with anything belonging to a woman. And to convolute things even further, out of the things that were found on the tapes for the Sony cassette player, 2 of them were soundtracks for anime, and the other one had been recorded over, leaving a disturbing message with a man's voice on it.
死者の声から8年、最終鑑定の結果、白骨遺体は男性で SOS の声と同一人物であることが分かった。
Now, you know what that makes me think of? Like, people they tug on your heartstrings, right? And they manipulate people by doing that, while doing that. Like, a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some people who have plans on doing something to you, they'll make it seem like they're in distress. Not saying that's the case here, but it just made me think of that. What if somebody was out there screaming like they needed help, you come to help them, and then they do something to you? That's why when people be like, man, somebody, I'm jumping into action. No, pump your brakes. I'm not always jumping into action, bro. Kids, okay.
And now what's apparent here is that this person is calling for help, and the literal translation reads, "I can't move, I'm on the cliff, SOS, help me. I can't move on the cliff, SOS, help me. The place is where I met the first helicopter. I can't go up deeply, Sasa. Lift me up from here." Now, I apologize if the translation is a bit rough. However, this person appears to be calling for help on a cliff. And in case you're unfamiliar with what Sasa is, it is a type of dense bamboo, which makes the context of this recording even more confusing. Because this person appears to be on a cliffside in this recording, however, this was found in the lower trenches of a valley. Continuing on, one item that was found that I haven't mentioned yet in that pile of belongings was an ID card of a hiker that had gone missing about 5 years prior, and this man's name was Kenji Iwamura. I will note that finding anything definitive on Mr. Iwamura or the circumstances surrounding his disappearance is incredibly difficult. The Japanese reporting on the situation redacts his name in every public mention of this case, and only a single story from the Associated Press at the time this event took place in an American newspaper even bothers to name him. All I can say definitively about this guy is that he liked anime, he was an office worker, and he was staying at a hostel, and it seems the only reason people knew he went missing was because he didn't show up for work a week later. As a result of this man's name being redacted, there's so many different versions of this story and the victim that it becomes borderline frustrating. Some sites on this case will mention that he had become an outdoorsy type in his last months. Other tabloid websites will mention that he wasn't the type of person to go for a hike alone. And even other tellings of the story mention that the man was celebrating a promotion at work and decided to treat himself to a trip up the mountain. But ultimately, if you dig back in newspaper archives, you will get one disturbing detail that is left out everywhere else and only told in the American side of reporting. The Associated Press had reported at the time this occurred that when they had reached out to the family of Iwamura, they confirmed that the backpack was in fact his. But get this, they were not so sure about who the person on the recording was, and they could not say that that was their son. So we have a pile of bones, a missing hiker's backpack, a recording from another person asking for help in that backpack, and an SOS sign made out of birch trees that was somehow made by a person who may or may not have had broken bones at the time of the sign's creation. Not to mention these trees were cut, however, there was no axe or anything of the sort that could be found in the local area. So naturally you have to ask, what the hell happened on this mountainside?
And y'all think y'all just gonna be like, come on, L, let's go hiking, bro. Come on, man. We can stay a couple days up there in the mountains and go hiking and all. No, thank you. No, thank you. I'm cool, man. Like, why we gotta go out there, man? I'm always gonna ask why.
Well, after some time, only a few of those questions can really be answered. The first course of action was to figure out what time that sign had appeared, and a local newspaper had reported that on the 28th, it was found that the letters SOS were reflected in the aerial photograph taken by the Forestry Agency and the Geospatial Information Authority of Japan on September 20th, 1987. To create a map. This photo was taken from a point about 3,700 meters above the sky. In the photo, the width of the letters SOS is about 0.9 millimeters. The first S is a little unclear and difficult to understand, but the last S can be confirmed. It's barely noticeable in the photo, but it's clear to the naked eye. The agency and others that take aerial photographs take it every 5 years. Keep in mind this was roughly translated, and I did look for the specific photo that they're referring to, but I don't know if this was released publicly. But this does mean that the sign was potentially undetected for some time past in 1982. And while this seems to match up with the timeline of Mr. Iwamura, what couldn't be explained at the time was the woman's bones that were found. As a result, the remains were reassessed by the Ashikawa Medical University, and they had later come out and stated that they had made a mistake, and the bones instead belonged to a male with a blood type of A. This was enough for investigators to deduce that this was Mr. Iwamura, and with no deliberate signs of foul play, the case was closed. However, that's not to say that all of our questions could be fully answered. And to say that we're missing a few details regarding the situation is a bit of an understatement. So let me start to break down what law enforcement believed happened, and you'll start to fully understand how none of it makes sense. Here is a map of the hiking area and the mountain, and it's believed that he hiked up from the ropeway along the ridgeline. This hike isn't very long or particularly advanced by any means. Now, the only thing you really have to pay attention to on this hike are the two landmarks that let you know when you cross over this ridgeline. That main landmark is the Safe Rock, which looks like this. However, there is another rock along this ridge that looks deceptively similar, and that is the fake Safe Rock, to which two hikers from the beginning of the story made the same mistake and landed themselves a couple kilometers north of the SOS sign. As a result of this incident, they ended up putting up ropes to prevent this from happening, but back in the 80s they didn't have this. However, our guy is believed to have taken the wrong Safe Rock as well and trekked along the hill haphazardly until he wandered sometime down into the marsh. And based on my look on the Japanese discussions on this topic, many people are quick to point out that had he simply followed the river and walked along the edges, he was only about 9 or so miles away from civilization. The terrain definitely wasn't the easiest, and it's definitely someplace that people can get lost. However, the fact that he decided to dedicate his time and energy to cutting down trees is another mystery, especially when you factor the geography here really only gave him one direction that he could head, and that was downhill. But I digress, and now that you sort of have a lay of the land, we can start to get into the nitty-gritty in regards to the rest of the bizarre details of this case. So let's start with the recording. Like I said, it's really bizarre that the parents weren't certain that that was their son on the recording, and I've yet to find any amendment to this initial statement. You'd think that a parent would be able to recognize their son's voice without much hesitation, but it is worth considering this only appears in the American reporting of the situation, and perhaps they didn't get all of the details right. In this initial article, it appears they didn't even get his age right. However, I will note it is actually quite common for initial reports on subject matter to get the age wrong, because everyone is rushing to get the story out. But your guess is as good as mine regarding the other details. And something to consider is if Iwamura wasn't on this recording, is it possible that he met someone on the way up to the mountain? And to tell you the truth, the evidence doesn't point to Iwamura making this sign by himself. In fact, the person who did the autopsy on this case stated that he wasn't even physically capable of doing it solo. Now, you might be thinking,
people actually meet people out here like that? Don't get me wrong, I'm not slow. I'm fully aware that there's others out there hiking. But I would be so skeptical, man, of if you've never... this would be the one place I'm definitely skeptical, because in my mind, I think everybody's hiding out in the woods trying to escape the police. When they on the run, I think they go to the woods, hide out until they're caught. And some are never caught. So I get it, man. And everybody who's friendly just don't have the best intentions, I think.
Well, aren't birch trees super flimsy? And not exactly. I selected this video to show you because this tree has roughly the same diameter as many of the other trees that were found there. And keep in mind that the tree he's cutting isn't birch, and birch is a hardwood.
Same thing.
All right, you just work your way through the tree.
And I already mentioned this, but he never brought an axe with him or a knife, so it wasn't even fully clear how 19 birch trees were chopped and moved 100 meters into the clearing. Moreover, the skeleton was found fractured on the left shoulder and right leg. If we are going to argue that he made the SOS signal, we sort of have to make the argument that he got these injuries after animals got to him. And even if he somehow managed to do this while injured, where did the axe come from, what happened to it, and why wasn't it found with his belongings? I will note no other records show he was with anyone during any of his travels, and no other reported persons went missing in the park during this time. But that's not to say something like this couldn't go unreported. And furthermore, you have to ask, if this guy had the strength to build an SOS sign, why wasn't he able to go down the mountain? Like I said, this area isn't super remote. In fact, where he was located basically only gave him the option to follow the river that leads directly to civilization at around 8.5 miles or so. Now, once again, you could say that he had broken bones so he couldn't go down the river, and while I totally understand that people with their life at risk probably aren't going to be thinking 100% clearly, the fact that police closed this investigation without understanding what happened to the axe is sort of questionable. This mystery has a catch-22 at almost every single theory, and usually when you have situations like that, you're missing some details, and 5+ years of this site being left to the elements doesn't help either. So things can easily go missing. Perhaps there's more to the site that's waiting to be unearthed. Getting back to the recording, however, many people have theorized that the man may have used the cassette player as a way of calling for help if he was out of breath and lost his voice. After all, the battery would outlast you yelling. However, one thing that some of the people on the Japanese side of discussion have pointed out is that there's almost no background noise on the recording. You would assume that someone yelling for help on a cliffside might result in a little bit more reverb or wind, or even the helicopter that he's referring to in the background. But there really isn't anything of the sort.
No, I didn't hear a helicopter, but it did sound like he was outside in nature. You could hear the sounds. Maybe not as much as somebody wanted, but it sounds to me like he's out there.
Speaking of that helicopter mentioned in the recording, it does appear that police searched for Iwamura, and as far as the recording also mentioning Sasa, that can be found growing sideways along the improper trail with the fake rock. But just like everything else with this case, we're not 100% certain this is what's being referred to in the recording. Sasa can be found in a variety of locations throughout the park, and perhaps this helicopter being referred to on the mysterious message wasn't even the particular search helicopter searching for Iwamura and just another passerby. I can imagine that if you were stranded out in the middle of nowhere and you saw a helicopter, you'd probably have proper bias to think that that was coming to look for you. So once again, it's hard to be sure. What I can say for certain about this topic is that it really leaves a lot of room for interpretation, and I'd love to know what you guys have to say down in the comments. Personally, I think the biggest gap in the story is the missing tool used to cut down the trees. And given how police rushed to close this case in a week, definitely seems like some details are missing. When it comes to the great outdoors, if there's something I've learned, is that only Mother Nature knows the full extent of what goes on. This is Barely Sociable. Have a good night.
Now, here's another crazy video, right? These are items with really bizarre backstories.
This is just a plain old 57-gallon blue barrel. These things are typically used for storing industrial chemicals, but not this one. Do you have any idea as to who owned this exact barrel?
That barrel looks like, what was the serial killer dude that was doing that in his room and killing the dudes that he thought were gay? Well, that he was going to the gay. Who was that? I can't think of the name right off the top of my head, but that looks kind of like the blue barrel in the room.
Well, this was recovered from a now demolished apartment in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and did have chemicals inside, but also contained 3 human torsos. This was Jeffrey Dahmer's blue barrel. It was purchased by Jeff in cash from a guy called Kai Whaley, who sold Jeffrey Dahmer the Blue Barrel on July 12, 1991. Kyle later...
I knew it. I just couldn't think of his name at the moment. Yeah, I watched the Netflix. Was it the Netflix joint where they showed that? Yeah. It was crazy what he was doing.
Went on to testify against Jeffrey in court. The barrel was recovered from Jeffrey's apartment shortly after his arrest and contained 3 torsos of his victims dissolving in acid. However, on researching this particular barrel, we actually uncovered something really deep. There's some weird timeline discrepancies from when Jeff killed 3 of his victims and when he bought this barrel and the acid, and some people believe there is a conspiracy at play that proves they were props to make the whole Dahmer case more sensational. Now, we're not going to go into it all here, but check out the Reddit link in the description to go down a rabbit hole that we regret going down. It's really some fascinating stuff. Essentially, Jeff claims he killed his last victim and put his body in the Blue Barrel, minus his head, on the 30th of June. However, it seems he couldn't have done this, as he didn't get this particular barrel until July 12th, and the acid that dissolved the body was not purchased until July 20th, meaning he had dead bodies rotting in his apartment for almost 2 weeks before he bought the barrel. Check out the link and let us know what you think. The cauldron. This isn't a bad looking cauldron. Take a good look at it. In 1958, this cauldron was purchased at an auction in Wisconsin by a lady named Evelyn Mayer. After years of being used as a flower pot, it ended up in the family garage to gather dust. That was until Mrs. Mayer's grandson, Dan McClintyre, learned that this wasn't just any old cauldron. This cauldron belonged to none other than Ed Gein. It turns out a guy called Horace Brown was a neighbor of Ed Gein's back in the day and knew the Gein family well. Well, after the truth about Gein's crimes was uncovered, he remembers police swarming the house, photographing everything inside. When they had finished, he and another local guy called Howard Llewellyn helped to remove various items from the creepy house, including various gruesome human remains. Whilst he was there, he saw a large black cauldron in a shed, the edges crusted with dried blood and presumably human guts. Next to it were tubs and barrels that were filled with bloody human entrails. This was the shed where Gein gutted his last victim while she hung from the rafters. It would be 50 years before he saw the cauldron again, when he spotted it in McClintyre's parents' garage. As soon as he saw it, he recognized it as the same black cauldron from Gein's farm. Seeing the cauldron again must have brought back some unpleasant memories and smells. While realizing the gory significance of the item, in 2015, Dan put the cauldron up for sale. He believed it harbored a dark energy and was keen to get rid of it, apparently as those who had come in contact with the pot fell ill from a mysterious illness and such. While it caught the attention of none other than Ghost Adventures star Zach Bagans, and he purchased it at an auction in 2016, it's now on display in his haunted museum in Las Vegas. Now, there is some debate about this one. I was watching a video from Grim Life Collective of a visit to the Grave Face Museum, and the owner of that museum suggested, without blatantly saying, that the Ed Gein cauldron is probably not actually Ed's, but who knows. If Zach does ever decide to sell it, we certainly won't be buying it, that's for sure. Wheelie bin. Most residents in the United Kingdom will be all too familiar with the humble wheelie bin, but 99% of us do not use them for humans like this one was used for. This one here was home for 8 agonizing days for Stephanie Slater after she was kidnapped by a guy called Michael Sams. On the 9th of July 1991, Michael Sams kidnapped 18-year-old Julie Dart after picking her up in the red light district of Leeds. He blindfolded her and took her to a warehouse where he kept her in a sealed wooden box. He forced her to write a ransom note to her boyfriend, demanding £140,000 for her release. However, with no real chance of the ransom being paid, he later killed Julie with a hammer and dumped her body in a field. By killing Julie, he hoped next time his demands would be taken seriously. On January 22, 1992, just a few months after murdering Julie, he kidnapped estate agent Stephanie Slater after pretending he wanted to be shown around a property. He handcuffed her, bound her legs and blindfolded and gagged her before placing her horizontally inside this exact green wheelie bin on the floor of his workshop in Newark-upon-Trent in northern England. Stephanie's hands were tied above her head and then tied to a metal bar under heavy bricks and rock. Michael told her that if you pull your arms down to try to escape, the boulders will crush your skull in. Although he did let her out to eat, she was blindfolded for the entire time. Sams again demanded a ransom of £175,000, and on this occasion it was paid. After 8 days of hell inside this bin, Stephanie was released, traumatized for life, but unharmed. Somehow Sams managed to evade the police after collecting the ransom and remained at large until a recording of his voice captured by police was played on the BBC Crime Watch programme all over the UK. It just so happens that his voice was recognised by his first wife, and she gave police everything they needed to catch him. Forensic evidence proved he killed Julie Dart and kidnapped Stephanie. In 2024, Sams is still incarcerated with no real chance of parole.
Every time they show somebody's face that does a heinous crime like this, such as this, you look at them, I look at them, and I'm like, bro, that look like that could be somebody that work at the grocery store, your local Walmart, your neighbor. And it's just mind-blowing how they have the ability to just blend in and look normal. Like they almost use that to lure people in.
And is among the oldest and longest serving life sentence prisoners in England. A comfy looking chair. If you'd been walking all day, would you take a seat in this chair to rest your legs for a bit? You probably would. But how many of you would jump up when I tell you a tale about this particular chair? This is called the Propofol chair. Any guesses? This is the exact chair that Conrad Murray sat in when he gave Michael Jackson some milk.
As soon as he said Propofol, it clicked. It was Michael Jackson. That's the only time I associate that word. Is when they say that, I associate Michael Jackson. That word is always going to be associated with Michael Jackson.
This is the exact chair that Conrad Murray sat in when he gave Michael Jackson some milk, a nickname he used for propofol, a powerful drug used in surgical general anesthetic, and something Jackson had used before to help him sleep. Murray initially declined to administer it, but after Jackson could not sleep, Murray gave in to his request and injected him with 25 milligrams of propofol, diluted with lidocaine. After Jackson finally dropped off, Murray momentarily got out of this very chair and went to the bathroom. When he returned to check on Jackson, he was no longer breathing. It was June 25th, 2009, and the world was shocked when global superstar Michael Jackson's death was announced at the age of just 50. Once again, Zach Bagans bought this chair, and along with Ed Gein's cauldron, it can be seen at his haunted museum in Las Vegas, eerily still covered in Jackson's makeup. Now, before you ask, this isn't a paid ad for his museum, by the way. We've never actually visited it, but would be keen to do so if we head to Las Vegas one day. Let us know if any of you have been. Bath plug. Just an ordinary looking bath plug, yes or no? Well, you've got this far into the video, so you know this is not just an ordinary bath plug. In 2001, German computer repair technician Armin Mivers posted an online advert stating that he was looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. Not the kind of thing online adverts were invented for. But it was 43-year-old Bernd Brands who wanted to go through with it. The two met up on the 9th of March 2001 in Mivers' home in the small town of Westerfeld, west of Rottenburg and De Fulda in Germany. After Brands agreed to have his manhood cut off so they could both eat it, the pair started filming the ritual. Before the amputation, Brands had taken about 20 sleeping pills and a bottle of cough syrup to make him drowsy enough to not feel anything. After Mivers removed the organ with a knife, both men then attempted to eat it. However, finding it too tough, Mivers decided to fry it in a pan, making sure to add salt, pepper, wine and garlic to bring out the flavours. Still unable to eat it, Mivers chopped it up and fed it to his unsuspecting dog. He then ran Brandes a nice warm bath and left him there bleeding to death whilst he read a Star Wars book. He eventually had enough of Star Wars, so stabbed Mivers in the throat and killed him, then hung his body on a meat hook. Over the next 10 months, Mivers chopped up Brandes' body and ate it, allegedly accompanied with potatoes and sprouts. He later described the flesh as tasting like strong pork. In December 2002, Mivers wanted some more, so he advertised again. The police were alerted, and after searching his home, they found the gruesome videotape and some remaining body parts. Not long after, Mivers was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison, which I'm not too sure how we feel about. Thankfully, after a retrial,
That's it? That's it. I'm hoping he about to say after a retrial, he got longer. He got more time. 8 years?
Was commuted to murder, and he was sentenced to life. Since being inside, Maives has decided to not try and eat his inmates, as he's now become a vegetarian. His abandoned home in Germany has been raided several times. The bath plug was removed from the tub, where Bernd Brandes drew his last breath, and was recently sold for $499, but not to Zach Bagans this time. So that's some normal looking items that are extremely unnormal. Thanks for watching.